By the time I got into Doctor Who, it was already over. It was the early 90s. We were living in the so-called wilderness years. Everything was retrospect. The entire 26-year legacy of television Doctor Who behind me. Only the annuals, the books, the audios and the documentaries kept the flame lit for this young chimp. A chimp who ultimately found himself late to the party. So imagine my excitement in 1993 when they announced a brand new Doctor Who special for children in need. A 3D Doctor Who special, and one where you the viewer could influence the outcome. On the evening of Friday the 26th of November 1993, I tuned into BBC One, and beloved presenter of CBBC and national TV treasure Andy Peters hyped up the pending spectacle of a brand new Doctor Who adventure. At 8 o'clock we will be premiering 3D TV with a special Doctor Who adventure where 5 famous doctors land in Albert Square. Okay, it was for charity. If it's on children in need, take it with a bit of salt. You know the drill. You let your hair down, you have a laugh. I mean, I'd be hard pressed to criticise something like that. There's only so much stick you can give something that contributed to a televised charity event that raised over £12 million in donations during its broadcast alone. I mean, were we really supposed to treat this like the real thing, or were we meant to just have fun? Doctor Who? Yes. 3D TV? Yes. Charity? Yes. EastEnders? Why? The biggest problem was this. The broadcast of Dimensions in Time during Children in Need in 1993 was, almost to the date, exactly 30 years on from the original broadcast of An Unearthly Child. See, this distinguished followers, as well as a charity special and a return for Doctor Who after a 4-year hiatus, also doubled up as a 30th anniversary special. See, when I think of the Doctor spending more than 30 years in the TARDIS, I think of more than 30 years in the TARDIS. A superb documentary, the VHS tape of which I still own. Dimensions in Time was what emerged when the original commission for a 30th anniversary special, The Dark Dimension, fell through. The Dark Dimension sounds like it would have been pretty damn cool. An ideal throwback to all the little Doctor Who nuances that Anoraks would have gorged on, whilst presenting a brand new, engaging story at the same time. The word church and the idea of the Doctor having conversations with lingering spirits of his former self gives me shades of Paul Cornell's Time Worm Revelation, though I might be jumping to conclusions on that one. And golly gee, would you look at this fella. Shove that in your cannon. Yeah, so that's where Supremacy of the Cybermen got that design from, the sneaky rascals. Anyway, I digress. The Dark Dimension also had naff all to do with EastEnders. The project collapsed. Instead, we got this. It's universally accepted that Dimensions in Time is a travesty, but my main point of frustration is and always will be the EastEnders thing. I'm just not into that show, I'm sorry. I have no interest in how many cars Wendy Dingle slapped at Christmas, or how depressed Ian Beale is, or who's a mappet in the eyes of Danny Dyer, or where dodgy Lenny's hurdy-gurdies are unless he's been mind-wiped by Davros. It's just not my bag. So that was a big chunk of the content lost on me from the word go. I acknowledge that a big part of this was meant to be absurd. But the thing is, we were living in a time where Doctor Who was generally seen as absurd anyway. It just wasn't on people's radar anymore. And despite the fact that a lot of us recognise, myself included, that the final season of Doctor Who in particular has aged extremely well, it just wasn't flavour of the month. Nobody cared. Except the core fan base, of course. And I can't help thinking that this project just had a bit of a black cloud hanging over it. You can find a lot of rushes and outtakes online, and to me, a lot of the cast just look kind of wound up and frustrated. I might be speculating slightly there, it just didn't seem like a lot of fun for anybody involved. Except maybe Sylvester McCoy, but that's Sylvester McCoy for you. So let's answer a bit of a burning question here. Can Dimensions in Time be called classic Doctor Who? Well, I think of it as a kind of pantomime callback to the classics. It's one big point, nod, acknowledge fest. A bunch of Doc's companions and villains all crammed into one bag. The bag that you get from an off-licence that splits as soon as you put too many tins in it. So yeah, it is sort of classic in spirit, less in execution. Even though some of the concepts in Dimensions in Time are pretty cool, and we will get to those, there's a whole lacklustre element for the production. It's just comprised of a bunch of tracking shots. There's no real intricate dynamic with any of the characters, except that moody bloke who's with Rani, and we don't even know what he's called. It really encapsulated the fact that TV Doctor Who clearly had no direction or future. You can canonise Dimensions in Time if you like. Did this actually happen? Was it a dream? Did all the Doctors and companions forget about this once they returned to their own time stream? You decide. Regardless, I would like to sincerely thank my patron Louise Wade for suggesting that I cover this story. If you have a classic Doctor Who story that you would like me to cover, then visit patreon.com/chosenchimp and become a follower for just £1 a month. You can then comment in the article I've posted or DM me with your request. Maybe just skim through the channel and check that it isn't a story I've covered already, and please no Dalek or Cybermen stories. The Cybermen stories I am working meticulously through anyway, and Dalek stories I intend to do those right back from the beginning, where it all began, as soon as I hit the 50 patron mark. So if you want to support me in that endeavour, please do, and if you've done so already, then you're awesome. Thank you. Enough waffle! Right, let's get into this, and give credit where it's due, because every living Doctor made a contribution to this, which is more than can be said for the 5 Doctors. Here we have Tom Baker, playing the Doctor, in character. He's trapped in this weird realm. Wait. We might as well cover this properly. Whilst perving at pictures of Cindy Crawford at his party house in Crinkley Bottom, Noel Edmonds gets a visit from the 3rd Doctor. Nope, not John Pertwee, the actual 3rd Doctor. As was part of the gag, number 3 verbally berates Edmonds for being a rubbish embarrassment. And even amidst all this stupor, Pertwee's performance as the Doctor is just profoundly great. He's there in the 90s, playing his own Doctor, and he just does a really good job. It's good to watch. Honest, it is. Anyway, before I get too loved up about that, I'll remind you of the context here. He's here to watch a programme about himself on the telly with Noel Edmonds. They don their 3D glasses, and more on those in a bit. And we begin. A red dwarf-looking ship next to a vortex. The effects are of their time. I don't dislike them. And there's the Rani in a TARDIS, but not as good as a TARDIS in the time in the Rani, I think it's fair to say. She's already trapped Doctors 1 and 2. They are pickled in time like gherkins in a jar, as she puts it. And you see their early 90s CGI heads spinning around the control room. Number 1 looks proper cross. Number 2 just looks tired and sore. But I suppose they are getting thrown into a time vortex. Cue the sped up Sylvester McCoy intro with a hard-ass techno rendition of the Doctor Who theme tune, apparently by a rave outfit called Cybertech, although they're very hard to find on the internet because basically everything on the internet is called Cybertech. And here we have Tom Baker playing the Doctor in character. He's trapped in this weird realm full of 3D shapes and sending out a distress call to his other selves, warning them about the Rani's plan to trap all Doctors in a dreary backwater of East London. His words, not mine. But he's selling the Rani's villainy pretty well for all it's worth, saying that he can hear the heartbeat of a killer. He then says, "Good luck, my dears," and he turns around slightly and you can see a weird wound on his cheek. It's an extra shiny neomorph. This is barely a Cyberman story, by the way, so I'm not going to make a distinction for that at all. He's imprisoned and so is a Time Lord. Is that really what the roundy things do? They only need an Earthling to complete the Rani's menagerie of sentient life forms, and the Rani can only do that by taking the Doctor out of the picture. And TARDIS zapped. And that's the plot. By the way, full disclosure, I re-watched Dimensions in Time on various YouTube uploads, because this was never re-released in any commercial capacity at any point. I read a comment somebody left on one of these uploads joking about the fact that this was like if AI made a Doctor Who story, which is funny because I was near enough going to make the same joke. First off, you've got the 7th Doctor and Ace, as you'd expect, but then the 7th Doctor changes to the 6th. Then it's the 3rd Doctor and Mel, and then it's the 6th again, but this time with Susan, who shouts for Ian and Barbara. Then it's the 3rd Doctor and Sarah Jane. Then the 5th Doctor, Nyssa and Perry. Then the 3rd Doctor, but this time with Liz, yay! 6 again, Romana number 2. I think that's Harry Sullivan, but he hasn't aged well. The 3rd Doctor with Victoria, and then back to number 7, this time with Leela, who becomes Ace, and we're all square, with K9 thrown in for good measure. I mean, if you are going to bring back all the Doctors and all these companions under one feasible plot device, then this is serviceable. And I do like some of these once-in-a-lifetime Doctor-companion combos, so if there is a takeaway from this whole spectacle, then I guess it's that. All the while, you've got these cameos from EastEnders characters, and I don't know who any of them are. Except Pat the Butcher, everyone knows that one. There are loads of winks to EastEnders stuff and things I don't doubt audiences would have gone, ha yeah, at. And at least in the first part, their airtime seems to be almost on a par with Doctor Who characters, which begs the question, why wasn't this just an EastEnders Children Who Need special where Doctor Who turns up? Anyway, the reason for these shifts in Doctor and companions is because he's slipping a groove in time. The Rani is routing through his personal time stream, and the inrush of time zones is done with the intent of sealing them all together. The Doctor starts out thinking that he was in China because that was his original destination, but he's actually in Albert Square, and jumping through 3 different points in time. 1973, the present day of 1993, and the deep, deep future of 2013. And you know it's the future because some of the EastEnders locals have been made to look old, I think. And there's also this futuristic train thing. If that was meant to be 3D, then they missed a trick having it in the background. When the Doctor starts to suss what's happening, Rani gets cross and releases a plethora of monsters. Loads of them. Ah, it's a sea devil. Cool. Nobody in Albert Square is remotely arsed. Monsters are all over the shop, quite literally, and nobody's batting an eyelid. The only people that are running are the Doctor and his companions. There's an Orgon, I can't remember, next to a very complicit Cyberman. Pretty dignified in this story, given that it's a neomorph. And a huge assortment of creatures from the 80s. They all stand together in a huddle, out of context, and explaining without doubt that more is definitely less. Never before have any of these creatures looked less intimidating, or scary, or less like puppets and people in costumes. Maybe it's because they're in EastEnders in the daytime, hanging out of windows. It's just silly, and kind of lazy too. And there's the Rani herself, standing outside the Queen Victoria Saloon Bar Free House. Must be a TARDIS. And that, distinguished followers, is the end of part 1. After the cliffhanger, Noel Edmonds, a man who I thought I could trust, told me that I had a great opportunity to influence the outcome of Doctor Who's adventure. Children take things like that literally. In that brief moment, I imagined, I don't know, to reverse the polarity, or just to have this swathe of doctors and companions at my disposal to do my bidding in the most noble and protagonisty way possible. I don't know what I thought, I was just excited. Instead, this influencing of the outcome that Edmonds spoke of actually pertained to a telephone vote. The vote was to determine which EastEnders character helped the Doctor. Audiences had a choice of 2 different characters, Mandy or Big Ron. Okay, so the phone-in did raise £101,000 for charity, so I guess I should shut up. You might be wondering who I voted for. I genuinely can't remember. Anyway, it was revealed the following night that Mandy defeated Big Ron in the vote, meaning this character had to step up and make a difference, and boy did she. During the small scuffle between Liz and the Rani, Mandy arrives to push Liz away a little bit, and then she runs off. Here's what it would have looked like with Big Ron. On a serious note, shout out to any EastEnders fans who are watching this, because I am aware that the guy who played Big Ron sadly passed away a few years later, so I am sorry to hear that. Back to the royal beasting. As if Doctor Who hadn't fallen from grace enough, part 2 of Dimensions in Time was broadcast at 6:45 PM the following night and was embedded within an episode of Noel's House Party. It clocked at about 5 minutes. So touching on the 3D element, I basically tried and failed back then, because in the first episode I tried to use the traditional blue and red 3D glasses. Obviously that didn't work because the 3D glasses for 3D TV were different. So the next day I went out and bought the proper thing. I think they were shaped like dinosaurs maybe, and yeah, just don't know, it didn't seem to work. I found the whole 3D TV experience as a whole a bit of a dud. I remember also trying them with a special 3D TV episode of Blue Peter in the same week, and there was a shot of a boat on the ocean and I was watching it thinking, yeah, that's there. But you know, 90s tellies and signals and that, the 3D experience was a dud for me. But what about you guys? Did you watch Dimensions in Time back in the day, and did the 3D element come to life? Let me know in the comments, I'm curious. Anyway, the Doctor tries to summon his past selves to fight back against the Rani, but he just can't defeat this menace on his own. His companion, whoever it is, has gone off wandering, and the Albert Squarians were little or no help at all. Fortunately, the Chosen Chimp is proud to introduce another edition of Unit Doing Stuff. Today, ironically being one of the few credible elements in an otherwise silly story. Well, sort of. Captain Yates rocks up in Bessie and point blank shoots Rani's gun out of her hand. Good shot, Mike. Then, whilst almost running over most of the EastEnders population, he drives the Doctor away from danger. Now at a safe location, they rendezvous with a helicopter that is flown by the Brigadier himself. Just as they join hands, there's another flash, and it's the 6th Doctor again. You know why this moment is cool, I know why this moment is cool. It's because it's the only time on TV Doctor Who that the 6th Doctor and the Brigadier met each other. And look at them go. Two actors who loved their jobs and loved playing those characters, having a little exchange, but you really feel like there was a bit of heart and soul put into it because it was their once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It's a crying shame that more didn't come of it. The Rani babbles on about her menagerie, and then it's the Cray twins, those two, Phil and Phil. Liz isn't Liz now, she's Romana II, who after a brief conversation with David Mitchell and his brother manages to eke out the obligatory Doctor Who line, even though she of all people should know better. She says Doctor Who and then walks off before anybody even has a chance to answer, and then she gets dragged into the pub. Plot point. Something kind of clever does actually come of this. When the Doctor lands by the Rani's TARDIS, Leela explains how the one companion that Rani actually cloned for her menagerie just so happened to be Romana, aka a Time Lord, meaning now there are two Time Lord brains in her TARDIS. And just as he gets into his own TARDIS, you hear Sylvester McCoy's voice saying, "It'll overload." Nice dub. Whilst freeing his other incarnations, including the creepy CGI 1 and 2, he can then override her computer and pull her into the time tunnel, the very trap that was set for the Doctor. Lots of sparks and the Rani is done for. Yep, I definitely did not affect that outcome. The final line of the story is the Doctor saying, "I, or we, are difficult to get rid of." But not impossible it seems, because that was the end of that. Back into the wilderness you go. And see you in 1996 for a far more credible outing. That's not to say that Dimensions in Time couldn't have had promise, because as I like to think I have highlighted in this video, some of the elements of the story were good. And the idea of having all these Doctors and companions coming back for a special makes sense. However, its execution, don't know, it just seems to go from one vacuous tracking shot to the next. There's no depth. There's no real clever way to explain this story. It's just being kind of mumbled in big bursts of dialogue, presumably because they knew that they only had a small amount of runtime to put the story across, and yeah, it just doesn't track, and time hasn't been kind to it, and yeah, there you go. One of the few things that I'm actually on this channel going to say is pretty bad, and I'm sorry about that, but if you enjoyed it, power to you. The whole point of watching Doctor Who is to have fun, and if you achieve that, you win. Anyway, the 1996 TV movie special didn't entirely come to much either, but it was a great deal more credible, and it was credible because it looked forward. If there's one thing that we learned from Dimensions in Time, it was that looking forward was crucial for Doctor Who survival. What's really frustrating is that embedded in this pantomime burst was quite a decent story. Imagine if they just did this properly. Like it or not, Dimensions in Time is etched in Doctor Who history. History that is never to be repeated again. Never again will we have an anniversary special where the Doctor reverts to a former incarnation, meets an old companion and runs around confused in a bustling town centre where... What did you think of Dimensions in Time? And are there any facts about this story that I missed? Sound off in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe. Have a good one.